guys, welcome back to my channel. I just want to apologize for not putting a video up last week. I've been going through some really tough stuff in my personal life, so that has kind of, well, I guess just taken over last week. So I really didn't have time to record anything, and to be honest, I wasn't really in the mindset to do so. But a week has gone by and I am feeling better. And I've noticed that in times where I'm really stressed out or I'm hurting, I actually turn to my writing, and I turn to my YouTube channel. I turn to all of the amazing comments that I've received, the reviews I've received for my debut novel, The Alpha Drive, and it just brings a little bit of happiness into my life. So I did want to say thank you for that. Since I did not post a video last week, I'm going to try as hard as I can to post 2 this week, just to kind of make up for it. So we've talked about actually writing your book, plotting and structuring your story, building your characters, building that whole world that you want to create. So once you've actually written your first draft, which is kind of what my previous series has been about, then we kind of get into the next step, which is editing. And editing is very different from writing. It uses an entirely different side of your brain, because writing takes the creative side of you where you're just writing, you're putting words on paper, you're building your story, and you're kind of discovering what your story is going to become. But when you get into the editing phase, it's a little bit different, because you're kind of switching over from your right brain to your left brain to the more logical and sensible side, where maybe you'll read something and think that doesn't make sense, or that whole chapter does not fit anywhere into this book. It was just something that you were writing. So editing is really important, and there are a number of different tools that I use in order to edit, and I think I have kind of touched on editing in some of my prior videos, but this one I wanted to be focused solely on my editing process, because I'm hoping that maybe you can take away something from it, and maybe it'll help you, because as someone who had never really, I used to edit things all the time, you know, in school papers and things like that. I always ended up being the editor, but you would be surprised at how much you can miss when it's an actual story and not something like a research paper. It's a very different process. So without further ado, we will get started with that. Once you've finished your first draft, there is a lot of editing that will need to be done. And there are 4 main types of editing, in my opinion. There's checking for mistakes, whether it's plot holes or grammar, punctuation, that sort of thing. Cutting, which is where you just need to completely cut things out of your novel. Adding, which is where you need to add things in because you realize that some plot or subplot that's floating out there and it's not quite what it should be, and you need to add more detail or add another scene in order to make that subplot larger and more noticeable to the reader. And then also refining. And refining is just really going through with a fine-tooth comb and really going through each of your scenes to see what you can do to make it better. And also you might be cutting and adding in the refining phase too, but those are the 4 main steps that I use in my editing process. So the first thing that I do when it comes to editing is obviously to have a printed copy of my novel, of that first draft or second draft, whatever it may be. I'm the kind of person where when I go through and edit, I kind of edit along the way, so I normally have to read the chapter before in order to kind of remember where my train of thought was, what my voice was like for that particular chapter, so then I can move into the next one. So I kind of, as I do write, I kind of edit as I go. So by the end of it, I actually do have sort of a more polished first draft than some people who don't go through that editing process through each chapter. But what I'll do is I'll have my first draft of my novel, and I will sit down and just go read straight through it. And if you have a weekend where you can devote to this, where you can do it in 2 days, it can really help you just stay in the right mindset so that you're not distracted by other things, and you can really focus on the story and make sure there are no plot holes and really find those mistakes that maybe you didn't notice when you were writing it. So what I like to do is I go through every single chapter I try to read it straight through, and anything that seems off, I'll write fix in the margin. So for me, it's very important to have a printed copy so that I can write things or highlight things. Sometimes I'll highlight passages that seem weird. I kind of color coordinate things, so I use different color highlighters. I have pink, purple, yellow, orange, green, blue. I literally have every color highlighter that you could possibly buy. I will write fix in the margin for something that needs to be fixed, and then I will highlight passages that don't make sense that maybe I need to go back and look at or cut or add or refine or whatever it may be. But I do have some tips, because sometimes just writing fix in the margin isn't enough. And trust me, when you've read your whole novel front to back and then you go back to that first chapter and you see fix in the margin, sometimes you're like, what did I want to fix here? That's how my brain works. I'll look and be like, I have no idea what I wanted to fix here, unless I make some sort of note or use some sort of code to help me understand kind of where my mind was at and what I was wanting to fix. So real quick, I'm going to give you some 3-letter words for the most part that I'll write instead of the word fix to help me remember what I was trying to do when I was reading it. So the first one is AWK, which is awk, which stands for awkward. So this really stands for something where I read it and something about the wording just didn't seem right, or maybe the whole sentence or whole passage was just really awkward feeling and it just didn't sound right. So I will write AWK up in the margin, and that way when I go back to read, I'll be like, okay, this is an awkward paragraph or this is an awkward sentence. And so I'll kind of know where my brain was at when I was editing earlier on that week to figure out, well, we need to make it less awkward. Another one to write in your margin is more, M-O-R-E, and this one's pretty self-explanatory, but sometimes you'll read through something and realize that it was underwritten and that you really didn't explain it well enough. So writing the word more helps me to think, oh, I need to add more to this passage, more to this scene, more to whatever it may be. And sometimes I'll even, if I have an idea as to what that more should be, I'll kind of write that, or I'll keep a separate notebook where I'll kind of number, I'll number that one as like more number 2, and then I'll write in my little notebook more number 2, and so that way I can cross-reference and figure out which one. But in my notebook, I'll write down what more I need to add to that passage. A third code that I use is no, N-O, exclamation point. And these are passages where maybe at the time I was writing them and they seemed like a good idea, but when you go back and read it, you realize that it just was not a good passage at all. So that's something that may need to be completely rewritten or just cut out entirely. But when I see the word no in my manuscript that I've written, I know that I need to either completely take it out or completely rewrite it. A fourth code I use is the word close, C-L-O-S-E. And this is where maybe I have a passage that is really close to what I was wanting it to be in my head, but when I read it, it just doesn't give off what I was hoping it would. So it's not something that I'm gonna cut or completely replace, but it's just more of something where I can go back and look at it and improve it a little. So that's more of, the close is more of like you're really close to getting to where you wanna be and what you wanna say, but you just need a few little improvements to get there. This one isn't so much a code, but it is something that you do while you're writing, is actually circling. I will circle words that maybe don't fit or words that I want to replace with a different word. You'd be surprised how much of a difference a word can make in your manuscript. So I will circle words that I need to replace or think about, or maybe there's a better word out there that I want to use. One of my favorite codes is move, M-O-V-E. And I use this one a lot because I'm constantly moving scenes around and changing them and changing passages. So the move one is really important because sometimes you'll have a scene and you're like, this is happening way too early, this should be 3 chapters down the road. So I need to write move, and then again in my notebook I'll kind of number it move number 3, and then I'll write where it should go so I can remember later on. Trust me, the more notes that you take in a notebook where you can cross-reference with your manuscript, the better off you're going to be when it actually comes to going back and trying to figure out what in the world you were doing while you were editing. Something else I'll write in the margin is check fact. Sometimes there are things in my novels that are actual real life facts where I need to go back and check and make sure that that fact is right. Sometimes I'll just kind of put in a filler. A lot of the time I will just research it right on the dot. not that this is in my story, but say you need to know the distance between Paris and Berlin and you just guess a certain number of miles, it might be good to fact check that and make sure you actually have the right. I do remember something that that I had in the Alpha Drive. I needed to look up the tallest building in the world. And I know that's really such a random thing, but I just realized something that I did have to research. And it's the Burj Khalifa, and right now, because I wrote it down and I can't remember how tall it is, but the Seventh Sanctum building ends up being taller than that. So that was something I actually had to fact check and look up and research, so that in case any one of my readers decided to go and look that up, they would be like, oh, she actually did her research, and I mean, it's a fact and it's correct. So another code I use is check back. And this is more along the lines of consistency. It's just to make sure that everything that I've written is consistent throughout the book. For instance, you know, the character's name, I did go through a couple of name changes for some of my characters, just making sure that the names are correct all throughout the book, making sure that, you know, maybe you chose a certain hometown for your protagonist. You just need to make sure that that stays consistent throughout the book and that you don't suddenly change where your protagonist is from, or like the name of a pet or something like that. Just, it's little things like that, just consistency. You'd be surprised at how when you're writing, you're like, oh, I think that I said that she was from here. But that goes back to knowing your characters. So that's really important. Okay, so once I have all of those codes written in my manuscript, and I've read it all the way through one time, then I can go back to the very beginning and also cross-reference my handy dandy notebook and go through it again and actually start making those revisions. For me, those revisions, if I'm really, really dedicated, or I have a month that is a little bit slower in my life, then I can probably get those revisions done in a month. So once I read through all of those codes, then it's time to go through and read it again and figure out what needs to be cut and what needs to be added. I don't like to do that when I read the draft the first time around, because sometimes I'm really just more focused on things that sound awkward or don't sound right. So in my second read through, I can really focus on the scenes that need to be cut or completely replaced, or things that need to be added. So I will sit there and I will read through it a second time, and I will just focus on things that need to be cut or need to be added. And I'll do the same thing where I'll have, you know, I'll write CUT or ADD depending on what I need to do, and I'll have my notebook and I'll write down, I'll number everything and cross-reference and write down what needs to be cut, why it needs to be cut, if I have an idea for a replacement, and then I'll do the same thing for adding, where I'll just write down what I think I need to add. That is all that I have for you guys today. In my next video, I will talk about reworking your novel, which, like I just mentioned before, is really making it shine and finding opportunities to make it absolutely stunning. So that's a really fun part. I think it's more fun than the editing phase, where you're kind of going through and figuring out what's awkward and what doesn't sound right. So making it really shine and making it just a stunning story is so much fun. So that is what I will talk about in my next video. My debut novel, The Alpha Drive, is still available on Amazon for purchase in both paperback and ebook, so I would love for you to check it out. I will be hosting a giveaway on Goodreads sometime in the near future. It'll probably be the end of February. I think the dates are going to be February 23rd to March 1st, but I'll look back and figure that out and then announce that when the time comes. I post new videos every Tuesday. I will see you guys next time. Bye!